Welcome everyone to the Mindset Podcast, where each episode we explore how embracing adversity can lead to positive change. A little over 6 years ago I got sober from alcohol and drug addiction, and what I learnt during that period of time was how the biggest or smallest challenges in my life paved the way for the most positive and enriching period of growth and learning I've ever experienced. FRP is a people-focused firm, both with our excellent teams internally and clients we work with day to day. Like many other professional services firms, we give particular attention to delivering the best advice for people under what can often be extremely stressful situations. So it follows, spending time understanding how we can learn and grow from any periods of adversity we face will also see us evolve and grow as individuals and better serve our clients. This podcast aims to provide inspiration for others trying to progress in their careers, help professionals feel less isolated on their journey, and debunk the myth that we all have to be all right all of the time. Most importantly, we want to walk the walk of change and integrity with the experience of others who have walked the path before us. Challenges can be used for good. I absolutely believe this fact. I hope you enjoy.
You've recorded a couple of these mindset podcasts over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
But I thought it'd be interesting to interview you and put you in the hot seat for a change, to understand why this is important to you, why you've kind of created this podcast series, and hear a bit more about why you're here today.
Yeah. It's a great question. So, from my journey, I've learnt that in a very deep and meaningful way that actually what was by far the hardest thing I've ever been through has definitely paid the largest dividend in my life, in all aspects of my life, overall. And I think when I look at that, it becomes almost impossible for it not to permeate into everything I sort of see and do. Like, so in all my relationships I have, whether it's outside of work or inside of work, in dealing with clients, in dealing with other members of staff, helping mentor people, whatever it is, that always plays a part in my mind. And I guess a part of me has become very borderline obsessed with how you can utilize and harness those experiences for some kind of positive good. And I think the reason for that is because I'm not sure I knew that before, and I don't remember being surrounded by people who were talking about that or who perhaps knew that themselves. So I guess a big part of it is just shining a light on A, that experience, and B, exploring normal, regular people, if you like, exploring with them what their everyday situations are as a way of trying to help people feel more connected, inspired and motivated, whatever it may be. So yeah, I think that's the large motivational factor.
Because I think the people that we've had so far in the series, no pressure, Luke, but they're all very impressive, and they've all got really interesting stories to tell.
Yes.
And the key part of that is the growth that you talked about. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your story and kind of how you've kind of come to this revelation, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I'm trying to think of okay. So I've always had a disposition to wanting to escape, I think, and I think that came out through a few means. That was probably partly to do with feeling like life or whatever was happening wasn't quite interesting enough for me, or perhaps I thought that I was too special and different for whatever was going on, or perhaps a part of it was derived from asking too many questions, being an overthinker. And in my 20s, that kind of revealed itself in partying, and I discovered going out, women, drink, drugs, all of that kind of stuff. And that was like a fun time for me. That was a carefree time. And it was fine because nothing's a problem until it's a problem. And then I started my career. I did university and I did a postgrad. And then I started my career relatively late at 25. I got a grad job, and I moved to London. I'd split up with someone who I was engaged to, and I thought, right, I'm going to move to London, and I'm going to pursue a career in London. I'm going to do this. And I always remember on the first day of that job, that graduate job in insolvency and restructuring, everyone going out as like for a welcome lunch, and it was a Monday, and I remember everyone ordering these large bottles of Peroni. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. It's a Monday, and and really it was off to the races from there. And I was like, okay, I'm in London, I had friends here anyway. It's a really good way to meet people was through networking and drink based events. And I think at that moment in time, I wanted more. On reflection, I wanted more than what I was getting from my career and from my personal life as well. And so I just sought out stimulus and excitement and partying, and that's kind of what happened. And during that process in my 20s, as I reached my late 20s, I kind of got less. I got less well, definitely, and I was more unable to deal with pressure, and a lot of pressure I've discovered has been created in my own mind. So, like, I was feeling pressure where perhaps pressure didn't exist, or I just didn't have the right channels to let that pressure out. And then, kind of fast forward, I started experiencing like physical anxiety and panic attacks. Often, when the day after I'd be drinking, I was going out a lot with work. Using the networking thing as a tool to drink, really.
Gives you an excuse, doesn't it?
Yeah, a great excuse. And in my mind, everyone's drinking 5 or 6 pints. Whereas obviously, I could meet you. We go out our respective firms or whatever, and you could have 2 glasses of wine and go home. In my mind, you've had 2 bottles of wine, whatever. So in my world, everyone was doing the same thing in my head, and the physical repercussions meant that I found it really difficult to manage work. So, like, if I had a meeting the next morning and I was on the tube and had a panic attack, which I'd often have, and the first time I had one, it feels like you're having a heart attack, so you think you're dying, and in the back of your mind you're like, this is it, and it's a really horrible experience. And I wouldn't be able to sit in a room with people looking at me, and I'd feel very physically uncomfortable and completely unable to navigate the most simplest of situations. So I panicked, and I started panicking more, and what I did to offset the panic was have a drink. And it worked because it eased me.
Because it's the chemicals, isn't it?
Yeah, and it relaxed me, and ultimately I subsequently know that my body was having kind of mini withdrawals, I think, at that point. And then as I hit early 30s and 31, that cycle slowly went up. It's like you put boiling water on put water on a stove. It slowly boils up. You don't necessarily see it. It's that kind of progressive thing. So by the time I hit 31, I had replayed that cycle of coping using alcohol as a crutch, and drugs as well, and I became physically addicted. So I had to drink. I had to drink to not have seizures. I had to drink to not have withdrawals. I had to drink to function. I had to drink to leave the house in the morning. And by the end, I was having to drink a litre of vodka a day just to keep myself from being hospitalised. And of course there's a deep irony in that, because I was killing myself. And I was hospitalised on a number of occasions with internal bleeds and all sorts. So yeah, and that obviously isn't sustainable. Obviously. And it meant that I hit a pretty big rock bottom at 31, and went to rehab, came out of rehab, relapsed, and then went back to rehab, and had my last drink was on the 5th of June 2017. So, and I went to rehab and then came out and found the community that I've got now, and recovery, and kind of, yeah, and 6.5 years later I'm sat here doing this podcast.
Living the dream.
Yeah. It's but yeah, that's kind of a very quick version of events. Yeah.
So you talked about having panic attacks on the way into work, and obviously that's far from ideal. But what would you do when you got to the office? Like, practically, what happens? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think back then I was definitely without any tools. I was out without any tools, and I was without the ability to feel like I could talk to anyone. I definitely felt like different, and I felt sort of less than. So it meant that actually dealing with that was a non-starter. Like, at that point in time, there wasn't anything I could do, if I'm honest. Now it's a very different story, but which is why I think I turned to I just panicked and thought, well, if I just have a quick glass of wine, and if that works, then that's fine. And then it's only today. Like, I'm not going to do that tomorrow, so I'll just do it today, and it's fine. And then, you know, but it's the plaster. You know, it's like the next day you're bleeding again, and you need to put a plaster on. And
I guess that's problem-solving mentality, isn't it? That's what you do for a living. You solve problems, and so you're going to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Here's a quick solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Fix.
Yeah, exactly. And it's and of course it kind of makes sense, because you don't just go to the point of surrendering and going, well, actually, do you know what? I've got a problem here. I need help. Like, it's just not what, you know, as humans, we're not really made like that unless we're deeply humble and completely open to change all the time. So it kind of made sense that that's what was going on.
Did you recognise that was not normal?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. No, I didn't. And I think I didn't because I made my world. It was the world v me. Like, everything was happening against me. You know, I was the busiest and the most stressed. You know, and if I'm completely open and honest, at the time, I really blamed work and I resented work, you know. And in hindsight, I can see that as I was just unwell, and that it wasn't, you know, it was, I was just making things more, I wasn't making things more stressful, but the narrative in my head wasn't helping. So, and no, I didn't. I found the excuses and the reasons to justify my actions to make it normal. So I didn't think it was abnormal. And actually, if you had asked me, you know, if you'd said, by the way, do you think you perhaps drink? I would have really snapped at you and been like, no, not at all. What are you talking about? No,
it's a very judgmental comment, though, isn't it? And I think this is the problem with alcohol, is that because it's everywhere and because it's so ingrained in how we celebrate, how we commiserate, how we do everything in life, it's very judgmental to say, like, I think you might drink too much.
Yeah.
Everyone knows they should probably drink a little bit less.
Yeah.
No one thinks, I could do with taking some more.
Yes,
you know, but it's very judgmental. It's a very difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, it is. And actually, the only people that, you know, bless them, that tried to do that were friends and family, and because they cared.
I was going to ask you, kind of, you know, who noticed? How was this manifesting itself in your life?
Yeah, it was. The people close to me obviously noticed. I think actually, in hindsight, most people noticed. I mean, I live with lots of shame around lots of my actions at the time, not necessarily because they were wildly immoral, but more just because of how unwell I was and how obviously you don't want to, none of us set out to sort of end up in that position. And I think at the time I thought that people didn't really notice, or perhaps I had them fooled.
Yes.
But in hindsight, that's not the case at all. You know, it was pretty obvious. But it was my family and close friends that really started to try and help me see what was going on. And a part of me, I didn't know how to ask for help, so I couldn't just say, I think I've got a problem. So what I was trying to do instead was I was trying to become more accountable and say, oh, you know, to really close friends, like, I've drunk 2 bottles of wine today. And they'd be kind of like, why are you telling me that? And I'd be like, look, because I don't know, I just think that's a bit whatever, you know.
Trying to start a conversation.
Yeah. And almost trying to get someone to pick up on that and to go, well, you need help. You know, it was either break my body or hopefully someone else intervene. Unfortunately, they did. Unfortunately, it was my sister who largely did. And she got my parents up to London for dinner, and I'd been signed off work for 6 weeks, and I drank too much before the dinner because I thought, let's get loaded before dinner, then I won't need to drink at dinner and no one will know.
Clever.
Yeah. And it's just like, you know, it's hilarious.
It's so stupid.
Yeah,
it's so stupid.
Yeah. And I turned up an hour and a half late because I got the wrong train because I was drunk. And, and I got, you know, and obviously my parents could see how unwell I was, and I got a call the next morning saying, you know, we put you into a rehab, and the relief was phenomenal because that was the, that's
what you were asking for.
Yeah. Trying, but yeah.
And how did work notice, or how did any of your colleagues mention it to you? Did it force them to reflect on themselves and their own drinking habits?
I mean, I think the way I kind of structured trying to deal with it at the time, certainly that first year, it's not something I really spoke much about with work, I would say. I mean, obviously work noticed, and it was from a kind of point of view of, you know, you're kind of smelling of alcohol and, you know, what's going on. But it wasn't something that was talked about a lot, if I'm honest with you. and it wasn't a subject that was particularly opened up. I came back to work the day after I got out of rehab the second time, which was far too much, but that's just my ego saying, you know, you got to get back to work. And that was 6.5 years ago, and you know, the world's changed a lot even in 6.5, 7 years, and certainly, you know, firms have changed a lot, and I think in hindsight that would be a very different approach to that. But that was all. The short answer to your question is not a lot, and the reason for that is because I was so scared. I was so scared of judgment and what people would think. So I was kind of like, let's just get back to it, and off you pop.
Brush it under the carpet. Never happened.
Yeah.
I'm fixed.
Yeah, which was, you know, a work in progress is what I know now. It's not fixed. But.
And you'd had a couple of sessions in rehab. The first one didn't give you the results that you were hoping for.
Yeah, and I think that's just about, there's a fundamental thing with any addiction, which is, you know, you have to be completely beaten. And what I mean by that is like the ego construct completely beaten to be open to the idea that you need to fundamentally change. So like if I sat here and said to you, well, Claire, you know, if you want to achieve what you want to achieve, you need to disregard everything you think you know and listen to me, and I'll suggest lots of things, and you just got to live your life like that. And to do that takes an awful lot of courage and faith in the individual, but the starting point has to be a deep surrender in yourself. So I went to rehab the first time. I had a seizure in rehab and got taken to hospital. I don't remember the seizure. I remember the withdrawals and the hallucinations, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And I was in there for 2 weeks at that point. And if I'm honest, at the back of my mind, I still thought at that point, in 6 months, I can probably have a glass of wine.
Really?
Because it wasn't a problem for me, I didn't think. It
Right.
was just a short-term issue.
A situation that you were in.
It was just, I just need to figure this out, you know, and I tried to get help at the Brixton Drug Centre, and I remember them saying to me, well, we can't just give you medication to stop drinking and using, you have to, you know, there's a program. And I said, well, I don't need a program, I just need to have something to help me stop, that's all, you know. So I drank again after 9 weeks of being sober, because I didn't really have a structure in place, or a program, as I call it today, or a community. And I drank because I was unable to deal. I went away with someone, and I just found them, when I landed, I was very irritable when we landed in Lisbon, and I drank for boredom, I drank to make things more exciting, I drank to have a phone conversation, to get on the tube, you know, to anything to enhance the experience. So I just reverted back to an old coping mechanism. Drink, you know, I thought I'll have one drink, and and it'll just take the edge off. And then it was 5 litres of vodka, and 5 days later, and I was back at my parents' place, you know, where they thought their son was going to turn up sober, and I turned up drunk, which is, you know, and that is, and I think all of those experiences are really important, because it's part of the stripping back, and it's part of the process of getting to a point of going, you know what, I can't do it. And I had a deep realization in that relapse, where I recognized in myself this insatiable desire for drink, for the drink in the moment. And I was like, no, you've got a real problem here, because, you know, you thought that you'd found a way to stop, and therefore you could go, but nothing was going to stop me drinking in that moment. And so when I got back to rehab the second time, I was way more open to doing what was suggested, because no one can make the individual do anything. This is the problem with addiction. It's like you have to be the one to drive the change. So it surrender, you know, it put me to a point where I had to just surrender, and it was the start of the beginning, you know, in many ways, the start of a completely different life.
So you said that you need to fundamentally change, or fundamentally be open. Have you fundamentally changed, you know, from who you were 20 years ago? Yeah,
well, yeah, certainly, yeah. And yeah, like massively so. I mean, interestingly, I'd say it's kind of gone, I was acting in a way I thought people wanted me to act a lot of the time when I started out in my career. I had this thing in my head of like, okay, I'm a graduate, I'm in central London, I'm working for a firm, and I'm a guy, so therefore you're going to know it, or you're going to do this, you're going to do. And I did all the things that, you know, I look back at with some sympathy on my younger self and go, well, actually, I can see why you did that, but it was all the wrong stuff, you know, and it was all very see-through, and anyone that was older than you and wiser than you would have, whatever. So I feel like I've landed back to a place which is more akin to how I was when I was in my early teens, in terms of my kind of how I want to be as an individual. So I fundamentally changed, but in an odd way, I fundamentally changed to being the person I kind of wanted to be before I kind of found that party lifestyle in my late teens and kind of got out of control. But yeah, it's you know, in the community I'm in, we call it a profound alteration to the way that we interact with life.
Okay.
Which is what's
happened.
Occurred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it worked briefly. It got you through these panic attacks. It got you through these stressful moments. What was the point at which you realised that this was not working from a professional perspective, taking your kind of health aside? What impact was it having on work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe it may have been when I had to go on some medication and I couldn't drink on the medication, and I remember having very weird side effects and hallucinating and having I can't remember what they call it now. It's something disposition, but where it basically feels like you're vacant in the room you're in. You're not fully present. And I remember thinking, okay, I need to have a drink here. And then that was probably 18 months before the end.
Okay.
And at that point I was like, okay. And then the morning drinking crept in, and you know, obviously I was aware that the morning drinking wasn't normal and was a bad sign, but I still found a way of justifying that it was just a moment in time that I'd get through it. But yeah, it was quite a while. It was probably a good year to a year and a half before I'd stopped.
That's insane.
Yeah.
You were functioning. You were doing your job.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, not to an amazing standard, I'm sure, but yeah.
But you're still here.
Yeah, I'm still here. I mean, look, you become really resourceful when you have to serve an addiction.
Yeah.
And it's true to anything in our lives. If we make something a priority, we figure ways out. And one of the biggest, well, there's multiple big lessons, but one of the biggest lessons I've learned from all of it is, you know, if you put your mind to something and you really value it, so figuring out, for me, it was what do I value? So when I'm out the other side, it's like, what do I want to achieve and how do I want to achieve it? It makes it a hell of a lot easier to find the focus and motivation to move towards something. And in a weird way, addiction taught me that, because I gave up everything for the addiction. And I was, as you say, I still got out of bed in the morning, rode my bike to work, you know, put my suit on, which was my armour at the time. It was my way of deflecting. And I got through the day. You know?
Therefore you don't have a problem because...
100%. Yeah.
Because you're functioning.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely
you're
thought...
fooling people.
Yeah. And I even took a subscription to the FT because I thought the paper arrives at 3:30 in the morning and I couldn't never sleep for more than 4 or 5 hours because of the withdrawal. So it'd be there at 4 a.m. And if I read the FT and I wear a suit, I definitely don't
You've
have a problem.
made it.
I definitely don't have a problem. So that's what I did, you know. And it served a purpose, genuinely. But that's like the unwell space you go in.
Yeah.
And you find what you need to find to justify the action.
That crutch, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's very similar to anything that any of us don't want to change about our lives. We'll find what we need to find in order to... And everyone has their own journey, of course. But I've really learnt that. So it's a really good tool for me now, because if something's not working for me, or if I'm not feeling how I want to be feeling, whether it's within work or outside of work, I can look at myself first rather than going, well, it's your fault or your fault or the way you've spoken to
That's
me.
interesting.
It's like, well, actually, pause. What's going on with you, Luke? Well, actually, you know that you can be quite self-righteous, or you know you can be really impatient. So maybe you just need to pivot first. And I think that's enabled me to be more consistent with people in general, I'd like to think, and perhaps more steady in approach, which is something I always wanted to be, you know.
It's interesting because we're talking now about the recovery side of things, and obviously you've talked about the kind of physical recovery that you went through, and also the kind of the mental kind of restructuring how your brain worked and how you dealt with situations. But at what point did you realise that your recovery wasn't just about getting sober, and that it was actually giving you some extra tools?
So, like, you're always told by people, you know, I got a sponsor, someone who's sober longer than me, who takes me through the journey that they've been through and a program. And you're always told that, you know, fear of economic security will leave you, and, you know, you'll intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle you. All these kind of big promises, and you kind of think, you know, that's madness. And it was probably, I think, after a year, and I remember after my first year of being sober, someone saying to me, "You've really stepped up this year in work." And I thought that's a really odd thing to say, because I've dialed it back. In my head, I dialed it back. But all I was doing was 9 to 5, I was on core hours, because work were supportive with that. And I just saw my program, my meetings, as going to the doctor. So I did that every day. and I just did my job. And then that's what taught me, it's crazy to say, but that's what taught me the value in learning your craft. Like at that moment in time, my job was, I was an administrator, it was a junior role, and I'm doing, administrative tasks. All I had to do was do my administrative tasks well. I didn't have to take over the world or figure out what, so
that's quite humbling for an overthinker, isn't it?
Yeah, massively. And after that, and I was confused by the comment, and I spent as an overthinker, as a sober overthinker, a lot of time, a lot of time getting tucked into it. And but yeah, it really dawned on me. I was like, wow, so this is actually just about me turning up, being present, being at my desk, being seen, doing my work, even if the work isn't super jazzy and exciting or the main focus of what everyone's focusing on, but just doing it well. And that speaks volumes. And that after that first year, I really started to see how that changed. And after a year, you start to focus more on your emotional sobriety, not just the drink, because the drink's just a symptom. It's like, well, you're left with what's going on in you, and that's where I really started to harness everything I was using to stop drinking to help deal with my emotions. So the tools that I didn't have before that I had to use the drink for. And that it very quickly became apparent to me that was going to elevate me in what I was doing, because it meant that I could deal with situations completely differently. So yeah, it was probably about a year after, and it's been a huge thing ever since. It's crazy how intertwined it is.
Because you've been really vocal in the firm about the importance of well-being and the Balanced Minds Committee and bringing that conversation to the fore. So do you feel it's changed in the industry or in the firm? Do you feel there's more openness
around alcohol? Do you mean, or around well-being or
well-being generally? Yeah,
I think there is a change. Definitely, that feels like that's happening. There's a different generation of people coming through as graduates, and it's a different world, and it's a braver world from what I can see, and it's a world where people are going, well, I don't want to make those same mistakes, and people are going, this is me, and this is authentically who I am, and that's absolutely fine, and I think that's incredible, and I love that. I never felt like I could be like that, which is part of what drove me to where I was. So yeah, I think things are changing from my experience, and I can obviously only speak from my experience. From my experience, a lot of that comes from others just being human, which is what this podcast is all about, really. And usually when someone sees someone else being human, they can connect to that, and it allows them to be more human themselves. And by doing that, there's a bigger connection, and we're more effective. So I think it is slowly, and part of the reason I've tried to be vocal is to try and hopefully, lead with some form of vulnerability around that, because, it's a miracle that I've stopped drinking, and then everything else has been equally a miracle. It's like I've not just stopped drinking, I've thrived. And it's been incredible. And every day I wake up, I write 10 things I'm grateful for every morning, and have done for 6.5 years, and I post it on a group of other men who are sober. And the amount of times I've got emotional reflecting on it, because it's just like, this is crazy.
That's lovely.
It's such a different life, and a lot of that has come from being able to have a community of people to be open with. So I think that's really, really important. So yeah, I think it is changing, and I think it's a mix of all of those things that's contributing to that.
So what impact does it have on you when people share their stories with you, whether it's through interviewing people on this podcast, or whether it's people just talking to you in the office about their experiences? Because you are kind of almost the go-to here, aren't you, for people that are kind of struggling with something or want to talk. How do you feel about that? Does it have an impact on you still?
Yeah, in terms of, I think it's always, I think connection is the antidote to definitely addiction, and connection is the antidote to a lot of things. If I look at why I get stressed at work, and it happens to me daily, it's like there's not a day that goes past where I don't feel some kind of stress or emotion, because I feel emotions a lot. A lot of it's in my head. It's an inward job. So if someone else is speaking to me, it does two things. One, it helps me feel connected and more human again, but two, it takes me out of myself.
Okay.
So it's like I can't be thinking about me and myself if I'm thinking about you, you
yes.
know, and you're sharing something. So it's a really useful tool. And then there's lots of learnings. So I've learned a lot about being courageous through listening to other people. And I'm sat in a room or someone spoke to me and I'm going, well, hold on a minute, you know, this guy's a barrister or this guy's a partner at a law firm, and the way he's talking, you know, and no one's laughing at him, so I can talk like, you know, and it's like you kind of pick up these things. So it's really useful, and it definitely helps me as well as the other person in that moment feel less isolated and less different, because we're all so much more connected than we realise. You know, we're all driven by fears and insecurities that from our own journeys, and I think pretending not to be, for me, was a disaster. And there's a world, you know, that certainly when I started my career 10, 13 years ago, that existed where everyone seemed to pretend that was the case, you know. But
you see it all the time.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really useful. You know, I think that will always be a useful tool. Other people talking and stimulating that kind of conversation. It's it's great.
So do you think that that the tools that you've learned through recovery have helped you from a technical perspective at your job? Is there anything that you've been able to bring across?
Yeah, I think for me, the personal world and the business world are inextricably linked, definitely. And how I perform with people internally and how I perform with clients is directly related to what I would say is my spiritual condition, my emotional condition. So the tools I've learned in recovery around, you know, I remember my first sponsor saying to me, I had to relearn how to do life. So I used to call him 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day. And if I didn't know how to respond in a situation, let's say if I had an altercation with you internally, I would call him and I'd go, look, what do I do here? And I remember he started saying to me, what I want you to do is go with your second or third thought. Don't go with your first thought. Just do nothing. Think about what you want to do and then go with the second or third thought. And it's these little things, and it's the same thing you'd say to someone not to have a drink. You'd say, well, don't have a drink. Don't have the first drink. Don't go with that first thought. Think about what happens if you have a drink, and then blah, blah, and you fast forward the time. So it's a similar kind of tool. And then what that started teaching me was, again, because I'm imperfect and I'm human, my reaction to things is usually almost incorrect, but my response can be correct.
Right.
You know, because it's within me.
And they're two different things.
They're wildly different things. And it's in me. I just have to find the right way that I want to respond. So it's helped me become, by practicing that, you know, in my personal life, and also by trying to pause more, sit in the stillness, meditate, do all these things, it's helped me be able to do that in work. So now I still feel those reactions rise up in me, and I can see red quite quickly. It's just my personality. I've always had it. And I'm able to sit upright and put my hands together under the desk and just start breathing a bit, you know, whilst the call's happening or the meeting is happening, and just start disassociating, going, Luke, this isn't personal. This isn't, you know, because my immediate response is a personal attack.
Yes.
Everyone's against me, and I feel the emotion. I bubble up and blah, blah. And all of that, again, I think enables me to see clearer, give better advice, be more consistent with people, which in turn creates trust, and then generally gives me a broader platform to operate my life off of. I've definitely learned that I can do a lot more than I ever imagined and achieve a lot more than I ever imagined. And I've been able to do that because I've created more space by practicing these things. So yeah, it's 100% contributed to both my technical ability in work and my general ability to deal with work, you know. Amazing. Yeah.
So what, in terms of kind of wrapping up, I think, what would you, what advice would you give to somebody that's not necessarily experiencing alcohol addiction, but that stress, that overwhelm, that need to be doing more? What advice would you give to somebody?
Yeah, I think it's never as bad as you think. You know, I've learned that whatever is going on in my head, it's never, ever, ever what I think it is, you know, and it's a daily occurrence that something will happen where I'm triggered and I go, you know, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, they don't like me, you know, whatever it is, it's never as bad as you think. And I think the most important thing is there is a solution, you know, certainly for stress, anxiety, depression, alcoholism, addiction, whatever it is, there's a solution. And that was news to me. I didn't think there was, but there is, and it all starts with yourself. And I think the biggest starting point is being able to reach a place where you're able to say, I need help. And that's the biggest kind of the most courageous thing anyone can do. And then it's of course finding a community or finding the person you can trust and doing that. But I was my own worst enemy, and my ego wouldn't let me do that. I found a way of doing it, thank God. Many people don't, and I've lost lots of friends to addiction. I've lost lots of friends to being sober and not finding emotional sobriety. So I'm one of the fortunate ones, and I've been given a lot of grace in that respect. But yeah, I would say, you know, there is a solution, there is hope, and things can absolutely change. You just have to ask for help.
And then on the flip side, one more question, like Columbo. What advice would you give to somebody that wants to help somebody, that can see somebody struggling? Because, I mean, alcohol in particular is a very, very difficult subject to approach, but how would you suggest someone goes about that? Yeah,
it's a really hard one. I'm fortunate enough to help a group of men in their sober journey, and along, you know, the 6.5 years I've had people that I've tried to help, or people that have asked me that question, especially in lockdown. There's a massive uptick of people that I hadn't spoken to in years reaching out. But yeah, it's really difficult, and the reason it's difficult is because there's not a lot one can do unless someone's asking you for help. And if they are asking you for help, then the one of the best things you can do is listen without judgment, you know, and relate, and not try and fix it, because no one tried to fix me. All that happened was I found a group of people that gave me unconditional love and didn't judge me for anything I said, which was huge. That lack of judgment was massive for me, because it didn't make me feel broken. You know, it made me feel less different, you know, in many ways. So just simply being able to do that is a huge thing. And it goes back to my point I said earlier, connection being a huge antidote. So I don't think it's about fixing people, it's about holding space for people and being able to relate your own imperfections and wisdom back, and of course along the line, depending on what it is, professional help where you need professional help, you know, that's got to be a reality of life as well. But yeah, I think that is a huge thing. And if someone's asking for help, or you say, you know, call me, and they call, make sure you pick up the phone or return the call, you know, because that's one sure way not to build that relationship. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I know we've had this conversation many, many times.
Yeah.
But it's always interesting. There's always something.
Yeah.
Doing a great job.